So, welcome to the second instalment of GrantTree Fundamentals. I think it's worth recapping why we're here. This is about what we're calling the constitutional core of the business, which is the stuff that applies to every aspect of what we do. Of course, it's open to change by the advice process, but whatever's in the core should kind of apply universally across the business. I think it's important also to say that, defend your constitutionally protected rights. So another way of looking at that is, if we want to benefit from this culture, we have to make the culture. Because what we do is what makes the culture, and that includes making sure that, like pulling up other people, talking to them about what they're doing and how their behavior fits in. The kind of three founding principles of open culture are trust. So we believe that people act with good intention, that people want to work, that people are motivated, that people have the interests of the wider group at heart. We believe that power should be an abundant resource, that everyone should be a business person, everyone should have the power of the CEO, and we believe that people should be free to exercise that power without coercion, without the influence of coercion or trust. So obviously kind of power and freedom have a bit of a balancing effect on each other. Last week we talked about the advice process, which is the way that we make all decisions at GrantTree. It's also the fundamental driver of open culture, because it's through making decisions and taking actions that we express our power. And in some ways this presentation is kind of an advice process, because we're talking about something that impacts everybody. So feedback on the stuff we're talking about is very welcome.
It's worth just emphasising that. I mean, role change is a very complicated topic that we're going to talk about, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about it and coming up with the way that we think it should work. But obviously, this is something that impacts everybody, and we think we've got a good theory for how that should work, or good practice for how that should work. But we're absolutely open to feedback, and in fact, we are seeking advice. If you see ways that it doesn't work, then it's probably quite important to let us know before it becomes the constitutional core and becomes the way that we work. Otherwise, we're all going to suffer for the ways that it doesn't work. So please do provide advice.
For me, we started out in this presentation thinking about role change, but for me, I really want to talk about it in terms of what to work on at GrantTree, because for me, it's not just about changing work, but about finding work and about what that work should be. There's obviously a lot to say about that. It's probably one of the biggest topics in the constitutional core, because after all, work is what we do. It is the stuff of the business, so it's the area where we're going to have the most to say. For me, the first and most important thing to say about what work should be is that it should meet your needs and it should meet the business's needs. Primarily, your needs are the fact that we believe, and it's kind of a part of open culture to believe this, is that people need to work. We all need to work in order to be fulfilled. And we want work that is meaningful, in the sense that it gives us it has a purpose, it gives us a place. It gives us, at the kind of evolutionary level, it gives us our security within our tribe to know that we serve a function within that tribe. So when the harsh winter comes, it's like we're going to be fed by the food store that we've created. So that's a really fundamental need for us, to have a sense that we're doing some work that serves a purpose of a group larger than ourselves. But we also have a need to be challenged by work and to develop ourselves through work and to stretch ourselves. And maybe you have other specific needs around work, and only you can know your needs. The business's needs are that there is work that needs to be done for the business in order for it to continue to have its life, in order for it to make money. And that's kind of the business's most fundamental need, which needs to be met. But there are also other things to think about in terms of the business's needs. So, there is work which is maybe higher up the business's kind of pyramid of needs, right? It's met its fundamental survival needs, and now it's starting to explore some other stuff. But there's still cost implications, things to think about. Anyway, work should kind of be at that sweet spot between those things. Another thing to think about is, there are lots of different ways of saying this, but work should be fulfilling. So in Joy at Work, they say work should be fun, and they define fun as rewarding, exciting, creative, successful. Another view is this concept from, was it Drive? Yeah. Yeah, which is the work should have purpose, autonomy, and mastery. Very similar concept to that is the SCARF model, which is Buurtzorg, how they built their organisation. Dan's talked about the idea of work that sets you on fire, work that makes you passionate. And also, we've talked about the fact here that to be fulfilling, work needs to be freely chosen, because forced fun is not fun. I mean, if you think about this logically, the stuff that you do that's kind of not work, i.e., in the classical sense, like fun, that's actually in some ways harder than work. Like if you've ever trained for a marathon, like that. I mean, think about how unpleasant that is fundamentally as a task. But you think, oh, this is great because you're choosing to do it, right? And because you're stretching yourself as you train. Whereas, actually, like writing an email, making a presentation, how painful is that really? So in some ways, actually having that sense that you have some autonomy, that you have some kind of free choice, can change the way that work becomes fulfilling. But so this, I think, is the fundamental responsibility that we all have in a self-managing environment around what we work on. If my work isn't fulfilling, it's my responsibility to do something about it. Oh yeah, I was saying, so here's like a real life example. I was thinking this as I was writing it, so it's nice and meta, right? I'm in the office writing a presentation in Keynote about roles because Daniel told me to. I mean, I'm in the office writing a presentation about Keynote about roles from notes that Daniel made that I don't really understand because Daniel told me to. Like, that feels drudgery. That feels like, why the fuck am I doing this? As opposed to, I'm at home because I have some control about where I work, writing a presentation in PowerPoint, which I prefer to Keynote, with some animations and graphics, because then I think, oh, this is quite a nice presentation. I'm proud of this presentation. And I'm doing it because it's interesting. I'm actually learning about roles by going through Daniel's notes, by having to put things in an order that I think will make sense as I present it. I'm kind of organizing my own thoughts and deepening my own understanding. And it's also an interesting piece of work because it helps develop open culture, which is a thing that I want to do. So I have a little bit of mastery, I have a little bit of autonomy, I have a little bit of purpose. And suddenly the task seems much more interesting. Basically, if your work isn't fulfilling, you have kind of 4 broad options. You can either change the way that you work on the stuff that's your current set of responsibilities. You can get involved in other stuff outside that. And remember, we're a self-managing business, so there's nothing that forms part of the business. Like all of the traditional bits of management and senior management have to be done by all of us, so there's an opportunity there. You can just completely change the stuff that you do at GrantTree, or you can just change the stuff that you do and go somewhere else. That's always an option. Because the work you should do should always be fulfilling. And there's only so much work in the room, and ultimately, if you're not fulfilled and you can't find fulfillment in any of the work that's here, then, we'd rather that you were happy somewhere else. And the ways that you can go about implementing one of those options, I think this is really important, that change, any kind of change that you want to make starts with you. And you really have kind of 2 ways that you can instigate change, internally and externally. So internally you have the opportunity to change your mindset, and externally you have the opportunity to change your circumstances using the advice process. So the mindset stuff is all about this, a lot of this kind of purpose, autonomy, mastery, but like the making this presentation, like the way that you approach it is important. And this then comes back to the fact that the way that if you want to benefit from the culture, you have to make the culture. Because if we want to have the kind of business where we can benefit from saying, oh, I can change my mindset to my work, I can really change the way, we have to continue to make a culture in which that kind of thinking and openness and honesty is supported, if that makes sense. So kind of all of the practices of wholeness and the other bits of kind of open culture help support and create somewhere where we have that kind of freedom.
I'd like to interject that there's something really interesting about mindset. It feels very internal, but actually it's really external as well, because if you spend your time encouraging the right mindset in other people, funny enough, you're creating an environment where the right mindset in you is also possible. Conversely, if you kind of want to have this mindset, but you don't allow other people to have the right mindset, because you tell them, no, you can't do this, because you have to do this, because you make them feel like they're forced, for example, then you're actually creating an environment where your own work is going to be forced. So there's a kind of very strong interaction between the mindset you encourage in other people and the mindset that you end up encouraging in yourself in this, which is important to note, I think.
Yeah. Do you want to tell the story about the 3 stonecutters?
So how many people have heard the story of the 3 stonecutters already? How many in the last week?
Has it changed?
Hasn't changed,
Not for
no.
like 400 or 500 years.
But many people didn't raise their hands, so I guess I get to tell it again, maybe once and for all. This is a parable that I actually heard in Accenture of all places. The idea, so the parable starts with you're walking around this medieval town, and you happen upon a construction yard where they're building some kind of big building. And there's three stone cutters there, and each of them is doing exactly the same thing. They've got some kind of implement, I guess, a shake or something, chisel, whatever. They're cutting stones, they're making rough stones into smoother stones. And they're all doing exactly the same thing. And you go up to the first person, you ask, so what are you doing there? And the first guy looks at you and spits on the floor and says, what does it look like I'm doing? I'm cutting a fucking stone, I'm making a rock smaller, what do you think? And, okay, kind of back off a little bit. You move on to the second person and ask them, well, what are you doing? And he's doing exactly the same thing, and he kind of looks at you and says, well, you see this wall over there? I'm trying to make it really nice and straight. And, okay, you move on to the third person, and he's doing exactly the same thing as the other two. And you ask him, so what are you doing? And he stops cutting the stone, and he looks at you, and tears fill his eyes, and he goes, I'm building a cathedral. And the point there is that the purpose of why you do a certain thing makes an enormous amount of difference to how you feel about doing that thing. And that's the parable of the 3 stonecutters, which I hopefully won't have to repeat for at least a month.
So, mindset is a really important part of getting fulfillment out of work. The advice process is the other thing in terms of changing, if we think back to those 4 options, changing the way that you work on stuff, getting involved in some other stuff, finding a new role. Each of these might involve, each of these will involve using the advice process because the advice process is the way that we make all decisions by other people. So you might need to do some consultation on that. And it's worth just recapping the stuff that we talked about last week about the advice process. Anybody can make any decision on behalf of the business provided they seek advice from those impacted or with expertise. And that the advice process relies on freedom, trust, clarity, transparency, and curiosity, and is held back by their opposites: coercion, fear, ambiguity, secrecy, closed-mindedness. So, in other words, if you're saying, okay, well, I'd like to change the way I'm working, or I'd like to change the stuff I'm working on, it's important that when people make these changes, that we trust them, that we trust that they have the best interests of the business at heart, that we trust that they are people who are trying to make a good and sensible decision, that we offer them advice for the changes they want to make, but don't try and compel them to look at the world in our way or do things our way. That both the people seeking advice and the people offering advice are open-minded, that there may be other solutions than the one that's currently in front of us, that change is not necessarily a bad thing. And that this should happen in a way that's kind of clear and open, and particularly, I think, around changing the stuff you work on, changing your responsibilities. Clarity about what you're doing, what you're starting, what you're stopping, and making sure that everyone is aware of that information is really important. That to me is kind of the basics of how we find the stuff that we work on and what we should be working on. I wanted to explore now just a couple of the sort of big issues that I think we've been facing around this. The first of which is the idea of I don't want to leave my team in the lurch. I can't change my work because. And that's an issue that's, it's not like that's been around since we started talking about open allocation around about the time I joined just over a year ago. And we've kind of been going around it, and so this is my kind of proposal of a way to resolve some of this stuff. For me, the first thing is to say, okay, let's go back to those principles of the advice process and say, let's trust people. Let's assume that not everyone is going to say, oh, this is this business critical piece of work, this piece that the business needs doing in order for its continuing financial survival, and I'm going to stop doing it, and I'm not going to make any arrangement for it to be looked after in any way. Right? But let's first of all trust that people are not going to be like that, because people, have good intentions. People care about the impact of their behaviour. But then secondly, let's trust that if somebody maybe doesn't see how important a piece of work their work on is, that other people will give them good advice. and that they will listen to that advice, and that they will, modify their behaviour as necessary. But another concept that I think is a really important thing about here is notice periods, right? It comes back to the fourth option, which is you can always leave and go and do something else somewhere else. Right? We have a very talented workforce, so everybody here could get a job somewhere else if they wanted. So if somebody is saying, I'm not fulfilled by my work, and the way that I'm going to achieve fulfillment is by changing the stuff that I work on, if we say to them, oh no, you can't do this, then they can just say, okay, well, I'm giving you 4 weeks notice and I'm going to go and do something across the street. So if 4 weeks notice is enough for us to cope with, to deal with somebody leaving a business critical role in order to go and do some work across the street, it should be long enough for us to cope with somebody leaving a business critical role to come and do some other work inside the business that the business needs doing. And again, in the same way that we have a fairly open attitude towards notice periods for people leaving for external roles, like William, and actually like with Amar when he went on sabbatical. If people want to say, well, my official notice period is 4 weeks, but I'd like to give you a longer period of notice. I'd like to change the work that I'm doing in 2 months' time. That seems like a fair block of time. Like it's give and take, it's trust, it's communication. The other big issue that I think is worth talking about is boring but necessary work. We're saying, oh, okay, work needs to be fulfilling, work needs to be fun, and all of this kind of stuff. But it's like, well, isn't the stuff that's boring, isn't the stuff that just kind of has to be done? And to some degree, yes, because life is ups and downs. How would you know you were, if you were never down, how would you know you were up? If you didn't have some work that was less interesting, how would work would lose its flavour? There would be nothing interesting to pick out of the of the mix. So sure, with everything that you do, in order to achieve it, there are going to be some bits of it that are more interesting and bits of it that are less interesting. But I think it's also worth coming back to the thing about mindset. Is there any task that we say, well, this is boring work? And so, well, how could you make it more interesting by approaching it differently? Could you, it's still not going to be, the least interesting task that you have is always going to be less interesting than the most interesting task that you have. But maybe the disparity can be closed a bit. Maybe there can be something in the stuff that you like the least that you can approach differently and find a way of making it a bit more kind of sparkling.
So, I don't know, do you want to throw in an example? So, as you know, I've hassled a lot of people, particularly at the beginning of the business when it was actually not just boring, not just tricky, but actually quite humiliating, which is why I say to people that start businesses that in most sense of business you can't avoid begging for work when you first start out because you've got no reputation, no case studies, no clients, etc., etc. And it was tough as hell, but I really had to believe that I'm doing something here that's going to bear fruit and it makes sense and it's part of something bigger, and because of that I'm going to push through. So that's one example. I know you've got another example of work that's not maybe very fulfilling, actually quite humiliating.
Yeah, Andrew took me up on the word humiliating. He doesn't think that any work should be humiliating. That said, I was thinking about some things that I had to do early on in the business that just needed to be done, and they were not very pleasant, but they just had to be done. And the thing, I don't really want to go into the specific examples. I can do if I really want to, but the thing that made it worthwhile to do them is because I knew what I was doing them. I was doing them to build a business.
And you felt they were worthwhile, even though they felt bad.
So they felt worthwhile because they served a purpose beyond just doing the thing. It was not just an action that is kind of boring and hard and unfulfilling and maybe humiliating, but it's actually something that fits into the pattern of building a business, which itself is an overarching purpose that is actually worthwhile and makes the little bits worthwhile. Going back to the parable of the stone cutters, cutting a stone just for the sake of cutting a stone. You can probably take pleasure just in the fact that you're cutting a stone and you're doing something, and you can take pleasure in doing that well, but that's only going to take you so far, and eventually you kind of need to feel like you're doing it for a reason, not just cutting a stone because there's nothing else in the universe to do but cut a stone. So, yeah. Before the questions, actually, I'd like to reiterate, because there were a few people who jumped in into the presentation. that this presentation is itself an advice process. We spend a lot of time trying to pin down a way that would actually work, that would be functional. But we are seeking advice before making a decision about how role change works. So please do provide advice, do raise your concerns, ask questions, so that we can make sure that whatever we do put in place in the constitutional core is actually something that works. So, questions? Justin?
Just probably more of a challenge that I've sort of thought about. Maybe not necessarily here, but definitely like in my previous experiences, meeting people in a certain role that kind of get comfortable, and then their salary is quite good. They're quite good at doing that role, and it's kind of like, well, they don't really want to shift, but it's still a drudgery for sometimes part of their job. Maybe they're just staying for the money, and that's typically in companies where there's like not a lot of purpose. So I think that's another sort of key point to sort of bring it back to. It's like, yes, you need to be satisfied in your role, and then if your salary is too high, it shouldn't be a case of staying just because you're comfortable with that, but also sort of staying because of the purpose, and not staying because of the money. I think it's just more of a challenge to sort of understand that could happen, and how do we address that?
Yeah, well, that is a challenge. I think the current compensation scheme is designed to try and avoid that problem of not paying people so much that they will want to stay just because of salary.
Yeah.
But we'll have to see how this works in practice, and obviously clarifying the purpose of the business is going to help this quite a bit, which, as we all know, is an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
Gone?
What if you propose to move to a new role, and as a result of doing that, you fulfilled your previous role, and then you discover that you're not excelling at that role? Where do you go from then? Do you leave the company?
So you're saying you propose to move to a new role, and that role gets filled by
Because
somebody
you
else?
have to, if you're leaving and wanting to move somewhere else, the
Yeah.
responsibility would imply that you have to fill that. So then you've moved into a new area that not necessarily you're not necessarily excelling in, or maybe you do such a good job that there's no need for that role. Would your next thing be to just leave the company? Or?
So I think it really depends on the specifics of the case. I would say if you're the kind of person who moves into a new role and then does it for a little while, and then suddenly the role is no longer needed because you've done it so well, I think there's plenty of other roles where we could use that kind of energy. So there'd be plenty of other things for you to do.
What about the alternative? Say I saw a role that I wanted to step into, but then found that possibly my sort of the expectation role overwhelmed what I thought I could do.
Ultimately, it's your decision to move to a new role. You're doing that because you want to keep your work interesting, and because it's your decision, your responsibility. You're going to face the outcome of that as well. Moving to a completely new role is a risky thing because you might be moving, for example, if you move from a role where there's a very tangible value, you're clearly delivering something of value, to something where the value is much more difficult to pin down, and you don't excel on this, then naturally people are going to start to question, well, why does this role exist? Why do we have somebody that we pay this much that's doing this role when we're not actually getting? It creates also ambiguity around your work. And from experience, actually, it seems that people don't really want to work in roles where they don't feel valued. And so by jumping into one of those roles, you potentially create yourself a problem later that you might not feel valued anymore. But that is a risk that you have to be able to take. That is a responsibility that you have to own yourself. Because if you believe that this is the right thing to do, and you've taken advice and you think, yes, I think I should be moving to this role because I believe I will be delivering amazing value there, then you should be allowed to do that.
I also think that there's sort of only so much work that the business needs doing, right? That the business can afford to pay for. And there's always the risk that you'll come to a point in a role where either it's done or you feel like actually it's not right for you, and that might be because, as you say, you find yourself thinking, well, actually, my skills aren't really helping me here, and I'm not really getting there. But then the question is, okay, well, what's the other work that the business needs doing? And if there is no other work that the business needs doing, then your option probably isn't. But how do we determine what the business is doing? Through the advice process, through saying, what's the other work? What do we need to do? What could we do?
Any other questions?
Comments?
Or comments? Yeah.
Just in terms of like practical change that process and how they would go about it. So obviously there's certain things which need to be considered, and obviously you can't just say, I want to do this, now give me advice. You kind of need to have a little bit more of a, you know, what style of deployment is that sort of going to be documented, or is it in terms of like how you, like a rough process of how you would go about changing your role if you decided to do that?
For example, find a replacement for the work you're doing.
finding a
Is that
replacement,
something? Is that as a general thing, or?
Measuring the impact of your proposed new role, so on and so forth.
Well, so I mean, there's a lot of questions you want to level into that. In terms of process for changing your role, Andrew thinks, and I agree with that, that the notice period argument is a pretty strong one there. That if we can cope with somebody giving a 4 weeks notice, then we should be able to cope with them giving a 4 weeks notice that they're going to change roles. So that would be kind of one element of the process. Obviously, people can give longer notice. Ultimately, if you want to change the role, it's done via an advice process, and you follow the advice process, you announce your intention to make a decision about something, you seek advice when people are impacted by this, and then it's your responsibility to make the right decision there, which may involve something as simple as tweaking a responsibility within your role and saying like, okay, I'm actually going to do this differently, or I'm no longer going to do this bit because I don't think it's worth doing, or any other number of things. It may involve moving into an existing role that's already a recognized need of the business, where effectively there's already like a need that's been identified, or it may involve what I would call a fairly advanced move, which is to create a new role and move yourself into it, which is, let's face it, a lot more risky than either of the other alternatives in terms of whether you're going to bring value in that new role. In terms of evaluating the impact, I mean, we have the peer reviews, we have the compensation is not meant to evaluate necessarily the impact of the role, but it is part of the feedback process in a way, I suppose. We are always working on getting better at feedback. I don't think for many roles that are worth doing, it's going to be very difficult to quantize exactly what the impact of the role is. I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, provide some ideas.
I was going to say, the thing that I don't know is, do you have the responsibility if you're leaving a role to fill it? I think what we've talked about before was that if you're leaving a role, if you're moving from one piece of work that the business needs doing, but it still needs doing, to another, part of your decision to move is your decision around what happens with this work. So you might decide, well, actually, the business can park this work for a bit, or the business needs to hire somebody, and if the business needs to hire somebody, I'm going to lead that recruitment process, or I'm going to ask someone else.
I thought you just sort of started touching on something there actually was the hiring bit. So, I mean, for instance, if I were to, I know partnerships or something we're considering at the moment, I wouldn't be qualified for that. But if I identified that need and offered to fill it, presumably the advice process would consider whether I was the best one to do that. And it may identify the need, but not myself as a solution. I mean, that's obviously something that's got to happen, right? But, I mean, you can't. Does that make sense?
So you're saying somebody may run an advice process on a role that you're interested in, but select somebody else?
So rather than just thinking out loud, perhaps if you saw a need for a new role in the business, perhaps there's a remit there to create a hire, propose hiring someone, put yourself forwards.
You'd get in your feedback, you'd get advice from other people saying that maybe you're not right for it because of X, Y, Z.
Yeah, I was just thinking out loud. That's an interesting proposition.
Would you know whether you're the best person for it without having previously opened up to the open market? It's a bit of a public segment mentality when we move people around internally, we can just presume they're the best. Without looking externally, how do you know that there's not sort of 50%, 100%, 80%?
Well, I guess that's just the advice process, though, isn't it?
Yeah, so I mean, the responsibility is on the person making the decision, which may be the person doing the role, or maybe the person creating the role, or that may be the same person. Or it may be a third person altogether. Somebody's created a role and somebody's looking to move into the role and there's a third party who's making a decision about it. But somebody needs to take responsibility for that decision, for making the right decision. And taking into account all the very specific factors to that part of the situation. which I don't think we can sort of legislate ahead of time exactly all the rules and all the stuff. Because
I think a lot of the conversations that happened around the pay committee was the time it would take to replace that person. So I think that is a clear indication, having had a conversation with a room full of people, as to the time scale that people should be looking at. Because
I think
it's
it's
picked 4 weeks. If as a group we turn around and said, we think it would be difficult to replace you.
it's dependent on role, and it's
Yeah.
not just about getting somebody in the door with that job. I think it's about
Yeah.
somebody needs to get up to speed to that level so that the business doesn't falter. Yeah.
And there's an interesting conversation, probably a little bit off topic for this particular meeting, about whether we need to adjust the notice periods in the contract. If we believe that it takes a long time to replace somebody, should we have a longer notice period on the contract?
One tricky thing I don't know which we've covered yet, which is a lot of people leave roles because they don't enjoy the role, or they've felt they've got enough from it and they've seen a more attractive role. That's quite commonly a reason to leave the role. It's not because I feel I've reached a certain level, it's just I would prefer to do that role. How, if everybody does that,
it's a really interesting question. It's something we spent probably about an hour arguing about. the key, so there's a number of key angles to that answer. One is to our thinking around this. One is around trust. So we have to trust that people are not going to be just like shifting roles from foot to foot just to try and keep moving. And the fact is we haven't really seen that kind of behavior in the years that the company has operated. So we shouldn't assume that people are going to try and abuse the system and design the system to
there has been a migration from CMing, that's what I mean.
So in terms of the migration from CMing, we haven't actually seen that happen all that much. There is a desire to change the work, but there's Andrew pointed to a slightly different answer to the way that people can make the CM work more interesting, which is to help to allow the CM work to be restructured, how you do it, why you do it, the way that you organize the process to actually regain that control over how you do your own work. That said, people should have the responsibility, the ability to go and change their role if they feel that that's the way that they're going to be delivering more value. I was going somewhere with this answer. So you were asking, so what if so what about people who want to change roles? So, okay, so there's an interesting angle to this as well around trust. So if you've got somebody, for example, who have a very high level of trust, and they say, I want to change my role from this. I know it's a frontline role and stuff, but I think I can add a lot more value to this other role if I shift into this other role. If you trust them, you will let them take the responsibility for making that choice. It's only if you allow the kind of distrustful part of you to take over that you're going to say, well, I'm not sure, like maybe you're trying to sort of get away from a role or something. No, like if you have a high level of trust in somebody, you're going to absolutely agree with them moving into something that they think is going to be better for them, for the company, and so on. So I think where the kind of concern about people shifting role happens is where the trust isn't quite there. Obviously there's an interesting topic there around the trust building period, which we're going to cover in a later presentation. So the answer there, I think, is not so much to try and create a set of rules that prevent the people from shifting roles, but to actually continue to encourage trust to grow in the environments that we work with, people that we do trust that they will make the right choices in the circumstances.
There is a difficulty though in terms of when you trust people in core roles, so you know that their skills are aligned to one particular role. Like you trust Tiger Woods that he's a great golf player, but you wouldn't trust him on a football pitch. He's a great person, he hasn't changed, he's in line with the values of the organisation, but in a different position. You wouldn't normally just have somebody just completely shift. So the business needs have often been taken into consideration. People have often taken on small projects to prove and show their interest and their ability to do things in the areas of interest before they jump. It's very rare that people have just written a proposal and said, I'm just going to jump ship, this is what I'm doing tomorrow.
Yes, that's a smarter way to go and transition to a new role. Is to starting on bits and pieces around that new role, prove yourself so that everybody knows that yeah, okay, this person is really good at this role. And so since they're good at both roles, if they want to do this role, both roles are valuable. Then they should do the role that they want to do, because we need to hire one person for this other role anyway if nobody's doing that role. So whether we hire on the left or on the right doesn't really make that much difference. What does make a difference is whether we allow people to move the rules. I mean, in the case of,
I would say what would create trust for me is if somebody in the proposal with the decision process outlined exactly what value they were delivering to the business and what they feel they can deliver and will they commit to delivering the new role, and if they can clearly demonstrate this is what they want to be about and how they feel this will add more value to the business, then you've got a very clear, in my mind, you've got a very clear benchmark. When you see them in that role, you're like, okay, are you really doing what you said you were going to do, and therefore my trust follows? Are you perhaps not quite? And I think that's going to help as well. People being really clear, not just about actually my need is to do something different because I'm a bit bored, but what is the business need and how those two interplay. I think that's important for me.
Basically, so changing roles is an activity that risks a certain amount of the trust capital that you built, because people are worried that maybe you won't be as good in the new role as you were, but probably you yourself are worried that you won't be as good in the new role as you were in the current role. And so, since you're the one who's responsible for making that change, for changing your role, for finding something that makes you feel on fire in the company, then you are also responsible for handling that risk of the trust capital and trying to do so in a way that minimizes that risk.
In addition to that, I'd say that also everybody's responsible for the feedback in which they give in that role, similar to as you do when you start out and you're building a trust period. You need that stream of communication.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think there's a really interesting point about when changing the way that people work on their role. If for example I was a client manager and I decided I want to decide to not use Guardian anymore, then that is a valid decision under the advice process. But you'd have to seek advice from people. Now people have a responsibility to explain why using Guardian is important. If after getting advice from all the people who are impacted by me deciding not to use Guardian anymore, I still decide, well, I kind of want to run an experiment where I'm not going to use Guardian on this client because I want to see whether I can restructure the process dynamically to be way more efficient and stuff. I can take the responsibility to run that experiment and try that out. But if at the end of the process I end up deciding I'm just not going to use Guardian at all and just forget about Guardian and stuff, then that would suggest that probably the advice I've received in the advice process probably wasn't very good, because surely somebody would have explained somewhere, why using Guardian is really important. And if the person making the decision still doesn't understand why using Guardian, I don't see that case happening, basically, in the sense that we do things for a reason, I believe. We have thought about why we do certain things. Some things everything needs to be challenged all the time, but we do things for a reason, and we should be able to explain those reasons to people who query those, so they can understand why we're doing something. So it comes back also to the mindset thing. If you're using Guardian just because you've been told to, that sucks. It's like you're being forced to use a system and spend 80% of your time clicking buttons and so on. If you're, on the other hand, if you're using Guardian because you understand that, well, actually, collaboration between a dozen people becomes pretty much impossible without some kind of system coordinating all that. That using Guardian means that you can actually take holidays or be sick and stuff without being on the hook for all the client calls that otherwise would come straight to you. If you see the benefits and all the trade-offs that go to using Guardian, then you'd be like, okay, well, clicking buttons makes sense because it serves a purpose. I can see and I can understand what that purpose is. Does that make sense? Yeah?
First thing, so in terms of involved in other things, because I remember when I started, it was 80-20 was floated around. So you spend 8% of your time doing core roles and then 20% of the time doing what interests you, but still has value to the business. So I started doing this, and I think with the anonymous feedback, sessions or whatever, it became clear that that wasn't actually, people weren't actually comfortable with that. So it sort of changed my behaviour. But so, I mean, are we going to do something like 80-20, or like how comfortable are people going to actually be with other people getting involved in other things?
So personally, like, I don't know where the 80-20 thing came from.
AES.
Well, no, but AES has a different, because the 80-20 thing that you're mentioning is the Google 80-20, where you spend 80% on your core role and 20% working on projects that you choose, like, that will benefit the company. I don't think we've ever implemented that. We might have mentioned 80-20 in the sense that, in the AES sense, where we say, well, in a company with self-management, the management still has to happen. All these kind of functions that will be centralized, like HR, hiring, etc., all this kind of stuff, still needs to happen, but it's distributed across the company. And so that means that typically you're probably spending 20% of your time doing stuff that's not your core role. That's not the same thing as saying you spend 20% of your time doing like whatever project you pick. Although it is kind of similar.
It's similar, because I mean, if it all goes through an advice process, what's the difference?
It's
I'd say if we did the experiment where we put it in the middle of the room and got people to stand at different points, there would be a variation of where people stood. So I don't think it's fair to dismiss things. I'm not saying you are, but I think he wouldn't be the only person who wouldn't agree that there's a bit of sort of clarity required on that.
We've been trying to make something like, we've been aspiring to make this thing that we call 80-20 work for a while, and I don't feel that I mean, it's still very much a work in process. I feel that that's something that we haven't got to yet. And I feel
also
that
because we are much less mature company than Google, and we need to take into consideration there's a lot of kind of things that are very fluid, and we need to get our shit together, and it will take a few years before we really know what we're doing in terms of open culture and all this stuff that this guys is like, people think we're bad. A lot of people feel like, how the hell can you make it work? And the fact that we have made it work is amazing, but we have to expect that there will be trip-ups and there will be difficulties and will take some time before we figure everything out. Very well.
Yeah.
I do agree with Pal on that, because I think it, and I'm sorry to speak not ill of the dead, but people had a very strict sort of work sort of system that didn't fit with a room full of people that were trying to get deadlines at that point in time when there's a high traffic. So you've got to, it's almost like cutting your cloth accordingly. If you're a room full of people and everyone's working at 100%, but you're still on the 80-20, you're going to put people's nose out of shape. Sometimes you're going to have to do 100%, sometimes you're going to have to work 120% of your time. And that's just the very nature of it. You can't stick with, you know, I want to work 31 hours a week, not when there's 58 hours worth of work to watch through.
So that brings me to my next point, actually, quite nicely, in terms of the oscillation. Well, we practice. In terms of like the oscillation of enjoyment of work, and of course that happens in every job, in every role, in every company, and how it can be affected to a certain degree by mindset, completely right. But in terms of saying that there hasn't been a movement of CMs away from the tactical credit role, CM role, to me it seems like there has been. And you know, you can do certain things like process improvements to make the role better and stuff like that. But my only concern is that if you, in terms of like recruitment and its marketing, if you promote fluid roles, I don't know. Do you think this is a reasonable point that there will be a saturation point at some point where there are no new roles to move into, and because people have been brought on under this promise, and then that promise can't be delivered, is that a future tension that might exist or not? I mean, it's just genuinely just a question.
I think it's a very, very interesting point that you actually brought that up. How do we sell the role? How do we promote it as well? So I think that
You're always going to be tax credit, CX, because it's the cash out of the company.
No, absolutely,
and
but
for people to stay there and not move.
But there is something important to be said for the advice, for the kind of trust building period, which I think you guys want to cover. And I think that trust is won. After you've done your trust building period, that trust is won that you can.
Actually, no.
No?
But we're still a work in progress. We haven't really thought that bit out, but like it's not quite like that. On the CM work, so I don't know where the impression that everybody needs to move out of CM work came from, or everybody needs to move out of the crime scene basically came from. So like the place where the work happens, the cold face. In practice, if you look at it, Alina, for example, the core founder of the business, has been on the core face from day one, and very happy to work there and make things happen there. There certainly have been some people who moved off client management and into something else. I think some of that is probably an artifact of the fact that that was the main function that we figured out how to actually recruit for, whereas everything else was always very hit and miss in terms of recruitment. If you look at what I've done myself in terms of cold-face work, for example, after the Hierarchy V2 was implemented, I've moved back into a role where I can actually deliver some value. There is clearly a perception there that somehow CM work is a problem. I think a lot of that perception might come from the dynamics that are happening inside the CM, the client management teams, namely sort of preventing each other from changing the way we work, because it needs to be done. It's a work that can become very process oriented, and if you feel like you have no way to challenge the process, then you feel forced into doing it. And as you said, forced fun isn't fun, and forced process definitely isn't fun. So I think there's a whole set of dynamics that have kind of interacted to create this kind of perception that CM is kind of like, it has this Dead Sea effect where everybody is kind of trying to evaporate away. I don't think that's necessarily a fundamental truth about the CM work. I think the CM work can be extremely rewarding. I mean, you're talking to founders of other businesses, you're delivering probably the most tangible value of anybody in the business. That's a great thing, and the fact that it's systematized and it's more process driven. And I spend most of my work usually working at the edge where there's no process whatsoever, and nobody can tell me whether what I'm doing is actually delivering any value or not. All the partnership work that I'm doing now, I hope there's going to deliver some value. I hope that I'm doing it right and so on, that I'm creating some kind of process that's going to end up delivering some value, but I have no idea. In the client management world, you know that what you're doing is delivering value. That's also a benefit.
No, I don't want it to have to sort of validate the role. I mean, that was my point in the email. You strip away a lot. You improve the process. And it is an enjoyable role because you are learning and you can build relationships with clients and you do the tech, and that's interesting. The calculations are interesting. And debating with HMRC, which I'm doing now, that's interesting. So it can be very interesting, but that's not an issue at all. My point is that it's more, if you bring people on and say that roles are flexible, and then they're not. Really, what you need is people to stick within the cold face and stay there and be happy.
So we've only really, and this is still just an advice process around this, and we haven't really figured out as a company how this role change happens. We're still just figuring this out, so that's what we couldn't really communicate it very clearly. Hopefully, as we get better at actually understanding what we're doing in role change, we get better also at communicating this to people who are coming in. That might help with that.
I think that's going to help, because what you're inadvertently doing without managing what we just discussed today is you're eroding their trust.
Yeah.
Because you've offered them something, you've explained something to them, and you're not fulfilling it. So straight away you've eroded someone's trust, which is something we've talked about and haven't reflected it.
But if we pitch GrantTree as come and work here, you do whatever you want, and then they come into the client management role, they're not going to feel like this was quite a sort of a truthful advertising.
No, exactly.
If we come and say come into GrantTree, you'll have a lot of flexibility into evolving your role, you can make changes, you can decide how you work, we give them effectively this presentation, that might be much less false advertising, and it might feel...
I'd even go as far as to say, at this moment in time, we have people in these roles, and these roles, so there's no spaces in the car park, so to speak, but, shit changes. I think that sort of level of communication is where we've got to be.
Yeah, and on the 80-20 thing, for example, the way I would explain that to candidates would not be, you get to spend 20% of your time on whatever you want. It's just that because we've distributed management functions across the company, you will probably end up spending about 20% of your time getting involved in stuff that's not your role. It will be your choice. You'll have to go and find the stuff, and it will still be work. It will still be stuff that delivers some kind of tangible purpose. So
that's what I did. People were uncomfortable.
Yeah. You see, what I'd also, going back to Liam early stage, there's a lot of people, and I've always thought this, and I think we touched on it a while ago, which is early stage, because you can't do your core role at optimum level, realistically, you're going to spend 100% of your time on your core role. because you're not functioning, you're not washing through claims as quick as other people. Once you've got up to the general pace, then yeah, fantastic. Take it down to 80 and do the other things. But if you've got somebody doing 4 claims to every 10 and they're doing 80-20, that will grind on the majority, or potentially could grind on the majority.
So this kind of connects to the trust building period concepts, which we're not covering today, but it's a totally valid point. I disagree with the way you presented it, but I haven't really thought through it yet, so I'm not going to go and like launch into this without having thought through it yet. But yeah, it's definitely a very interesting question to resolve right now.
I mean, we think it comes back to trust. We have to trust that people are going to give good advice, give good feedback, and people are going to listen to them. So, you know, if they're like, oh, you know, it's, you know, my first week here and I'm going to start spending a day week on something else, you know, it would be good to give advice to a person at that point, which is like, it's great that you have this project that you want to do because it seems really interesting and would benefit the business, but my advice would be just wait a couple of weeks until you're a bit more bedded in because, you know, this is the impact that it will have on you.
We've always said right people, right roles, because a lot of these things become effortless if you have the right people in the right role. Because they will have that propensity to go, do you know what, it'd be fucking stupid of me to stick my head into every part of business at this point because I haven't mastered what I came in to do.
I think, you know, also there's the
That's their own responsibility.
You know, also there's the extent to which actually, you know, if you want to get more involved in other stuff, the core role, doing the core role, doing work is the way that you learn about the business and how it works. So actually it's like, it doesn't matter what their core role is specifically. If you want to get more involved in stuff that's going on, the way that you go on a discovery process of that is by doing the core role. And I mean, like, getting involved in other things, I don't think it's like, you know, 80-20 is not a target, but it's in the sense that what does getting involved in other things look like? You know, is it task forces, is it side projects, whatever it is? I mean, it's self-management, it's open, there's no sort of, you know, boundaries in it, but the point is that you seek advice on what you're doing, and you should get good advice back and listen to it. Okay, let's wrap it up, because it's 3 minutes to 2, so we've got an hour.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Well done, guys.